At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Chikondi. Let's begin. Royal Advisor Trozax had spoken out strongly against deploying the three most powerful royal fleets to attack Earth. But now that his counsel had been ignored, all he could do was watch from home as the battleships ascended into the void, beginning their days-long journey toward the human homeworld. What he did not know was that at that very moment, hidden in the forests near his estate, a small crew of a human vessel was also watching the hostile royal fleet depart. They had been stationed on his planet for months, quietly spying on him and relaying everything they learned through his communications back to Earth. And now, they had just decided that their mission parameters had shifted, from surveillance to action. Trozax turned away from the panoramic window of his estate, his elongated neck carrying a big head, a defining characteristic of his species. The Brial stood nearly 6 feet tall, his body covered in overlapping crimson scales from head to toe. His frame was lean but powerful, built for both speed and endurance. The advisor's most striking features were his eyes, large, multifaceted orbs of deep emerald that could see in spectrums far beyond what most species could perceive. Those eyes, which had witnessed 3 decades of imperial politics and survived countless court intrigues, now held a weariness that seemed to age him beyond his 50 cycles. The estate around him reflected his status, modest by royal standards but luxurious by any reasonable measure. Curved walls of the most expensive materials credits could buy. The floor was a single piece of cushioned metal, heated from below to accommodate his cold-blooded needs. Unaware that his life was about to be turned upside down, Trozax was alone in his kitchen preparing the mixture of fruits, proteins, and artificial vitamins that would serve as his standard reptilian daily nutrition. His long fingers carefully measured out portions of purple kivat berries, their juice staining the white preparation surface. A small click echoed from somewhere in the house, barely audible over the low noise of the kitchen's various machines. Trozax's wide green eyes turned toward the main security display attached to the wall, seeing nothing abnormal. The small clicking sound soon vanished from his mind, dismissed as perhaps an automated system update. He activated the blender with a gentle press of his claw, the machine immediately turning on with a sound that filled the kitchen completely. The purple and beige contents swirled into a uniform paste, the consistency adjusting automatically based on his preset preferences. The noise was considerable. Brial's hearing was less sensitive than many species, allowing them to use much louder equipment without discomfort. This evolutionary quirk, which had served his ancestors well in the howling windstorms of ancient Lotar, now made it impossible for him to hear when his home's front door was unlocked from the outside. 3 figures in full stealth gear had just broken into his home, their movements coordinated and silent. They moved through the entrance hall like shadows, their armor absorbing light and bleeding with darkness, making them appear as voids in the space rather than solid beings. Trozax had just filled a huge glass with his nutritional paste, the thick mixture flowing slowly from the blender's spout. The glass was designed for Brial physiology, wide at the base for stability, with a long neck that accommodated their extended snouts. He lifted it carefully, savoring the sweet, savory aroma that indicated a perfect blend. His forked tongue flicked out briefly, testing the temperature and consistency. Perfect. He was about to take his first sip when the deliberate noise of 3 guns being loaded startled him. The sound alerted him instantly. Trozax's entire body went rigid, his scales automatically flaring outward in an instinctive defensive display. The glass slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers as he tried to take a step back, his tail whipping around to maintain balance, but instead knocking against the preparation island. His foot caught on the edge of the kitchen mat, and he fell backward. The nutritional paste exploded across his soft home garments, a flowing robe of imported silk that had cost more than most citizens earned in a month, spreading an expanding purple stain that would never come out. He lay there for a moment, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. 3 figures stood in his kitchen doorway, their forms unlike anything in his immediate frame of reference. They were about the same height as Brial's, perhaps 6 feet at most, but their presence filled the space with an unmistakable aura of danger. The armor they wore was unlike the ceremonial plates of the Royal Guard or even the functional combat suits of the Imperial military. This was something else entirely, a seamless integration of technology and tactical design that seemed to drink in the light around it. The one who looked like their leader turned to his companions and said something in what must have been their native language, harsh consonants and flowing vowels that the translator couldn't parse. The other 2 immediately lowered their weapons, though Trozax noticed they kept them ready, fingers still near what he assumed were the triggers.
"Lower your guns completely,"
he said, this time in translated speech.
"I have a feeling this one will cooperate."
He turned to Trozax and said,
"You can call me Agent 11. Please, stand up."
Trozax felt overwhelmed by the rapid shift in the situation, but he found himself complying. His body moved almost automatically, his tail providing leverage as he pushed himself up from the floor. He was acutely aware of the nutritional paste on his clothes, the way it had already begun to dry into a sticky, uncomfortable mass against his scales. Yet somehow he managed to stand without panic at the invasion of his home, perhaps because the extent of the danger had not sunk in yet, or perhaps because some part of his mind, the part that had survived 3 decades in Imperial politics, recognized that immediate compliance was his best chance of surviving the next few minutes.
"Thank you,"
Agent 11 said, and there seemed to be genuine courtesy in his tone.
"I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we couldn't exactly knock and introduce ourselves properly, could we?"
He looked around the kitchen with what appeared to be appreciation.
"This is a beautiful home, by the way. Very different from what we are used to, but beautiful nonetheless."
"What do you want?" Trozax managed to ask, his voice steadier than he'd expected. The translator rendered his words into the human's language, and he wondered briefly how long they'd been studying Brial communication.
"Direct, I like that,"
Agent 11 said.
"What we want is to prevent a catastrophic mistake. Your Emperor is about to attack our world, and while I'm confident in our defense capabilities, we'd prefer to avoid the bloodshed entirely."
"You've been spying on me," Trozax said, the pieces continuing to fall into place. "That's why you know who I am, and why you're here specifically."
"Guilty as charged," Agent 11 admitted without hesitation. "We've been monitoring your communications, your movements, your political positions. We know you were against this invasion, Royal Advisor. We know you spoke out against it in Council, presented logical arguments about the risks of attacking Earth. We know your Emperor ignored your counsel, as he often does."
The casual admission of such complete surveillance sent a chill through Trozax's body. If they knew all that, what else did they know? His personal communications? His private doubts about the Emperor's increasingly aggressive expansion policies? His secret correspondence with other advisors who shared his concerns? "You intend to use me," Trozax said, trying to keep the fear from his voice. "As a hostage, perhaps? To force the Emperor to recall the fleet? I should tell you that won't work. I'm not that important. As you've apparently observed, my counsel is often ignored. I'm one advisor among many, and not even the most senior. The Emperor values my expertise in certain areas, but I'm hardly irreplaceable." Agent 11 tilted his head, a gesture that looked strange on his flat, scaleless face.
"You are selling yourself short, Royal Advisor. But no, we don't intend to use you as a hostage. That's not how we operate."
He paused, looking around the kitchen again.
"Would you mind if we sat down? This might take a while to explain, and I'd prefer we all be comfortable. It is your home, after all."
The irony of the human asking permission to sit in the home he'd just broken into wasn't lost on Trozax, but he found himself gesturing toward the dining area adjacent to the kitchen. "Of course! Please, make yourselves comfortable in my home that you've just invaded." Agent 11 actually laughed at that, a short, sharp sound that the translator struggled to convey properly.
Fair point. I suppose the etiquette of the situation is a bit confused.
They moved to the dining area, Trozax acutely aware of the two other humans maintaining their positions to cover all exits. He settled into his usual chair, the one designed to accommodate his tail, while Agent 11 took a seat across from him. The human had to adjust his position several times, clearly not used to furniture designed for a different physiology.
Let me be totally honest with you,
Agent 11 began, setting his weapon on the table but keeping his hand near it.
We've known about the invasion plans for months. We've been preparing our defenses, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that when your fleet enters Sol space, they'll be destroyed. Completely. We have weapons and defense systems that your Emperor's military strategists haven't even conceived of, and we know exactly when the attack will occur.
Trozax wanted to dispute this, to defend the might of the Imperial fleet, but something in the human's tone stopped him. This wasn't boasting or intimidation, it was a simple statement of fact.
But,
Agent 11 continued,
we'd prefer to avoid that outcome. Your ships carry thousands of soldiers, beings with families, lives, futures. Our own defenses, while effective, aren't without costs. People on both sides would die for what amounts to a misunderstanding about our intentions.
A misunderstanding? Trozax couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Your species was catalogued as pre-interstellar. The surveys showed no significant space presence, no defense platforms, nothing beyond basic orbital facilities.
Yes, well,
Agent 11's expression shifted into what was definitely a smile now.
We've become very good at hiding things. It's a survival trait we developed on our own world, and it's served us well as we've expanded into the galaxy.
Expanded? Trozax felt his scales tighten against his body. How far have you expanded?
That's not really relevant to our current discussion,
Agent 11 said smoothly.
What matters is that we are not the easy target your Emperor believes us to be. And we'd like to resolve this situation without demonstrating that fact in the most destructive way possible.
Trozax considered this, his political mind already running through scenarios. If the humans were telling the truth, and the very fact of their presence here suggested they were, then the invasion was indeed doomed. The element of surprise, which had been central to the Emperor's strategy, was completely lost. But knowing this and acting on it were two very different things. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "If not as a hostage, then what? You say you want a diplomatic solution, but breaking into my home and holding me at gunpoint seems an unusual approach to diplomacy."
Sometimes unconventional situations require unconventional approaches, Agent 11 replied. We need information, and we need someone on the inside who understands that this invasion is going to fail. Someone who might be able to help us prevent it from happening at all.
"You want me to betray my Emperor," Trozax said flatly.
"We want you to save your species from a catastrophic military defeat," Agent 11 countered. "Tell me about the royal family, Royal Advisor. Help me understand the power dynamics at play here."
Trozax was quiet for a long moment, his tail tense, a sign of deep thought among his people. Finally, he began to speak. "Emperor Xirax is ambitious. He came to power 35 cycles ago, after the death of his mother, Empress Kitara. Where she was cautious, he is bold. Where she sought consolidation, he seeks expansion. He believes that the empire must grow or die, that stagnation is the first step toward decline."
"And his family," Agent 11 prompted. "His heirs."
"The emperor has 3 sons and 2 daughters," Trozax explained, warming to the topic despite himself. This was familiar ground, court politics and dynastic considerations. "The eldest, Prince Varix, is much like his father in temperament, aggressive, prideful, quick to see insult where none is intended. The second son, Prince Torvin, is different, more thoughtful, more diplomatic.
Interesting, Agent 11 said, leaning forward slightly. Tell me more about Prince Torvin. He disagreed with the invasion as well, didn't he?
Trozax's eyes widened slightly. How could they know that? The prince had been careful to voice his objections only in private, maintaining a public face of unity with his father's decisions. Your intelligence is remarkably thorough, he said carefully.
We try, Agent 11 said with that strange smile again. But please, continue. What would happen if, let's say, an accident happened to the Emperor? Who would inherit the throne?
Trozax swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. The implications of the question were clear, even if the human was maintaining a veneer of hypothetical discussion. The eldest son, Prince Varix, would typically inherit, but... He paused, considering how much to reveal. But there are circumstances under which the succession might be contested. If Varix were deemed unfit, or if he were to renounce his claim, Prince Torvin would be next in line.
And Prince Torvin's position on the invasion,
Agent 11 pressed. He believes it's a mistake, Trozax admitted. He said as much in private council. He thinks we should focus on consolidating our existing territories, on building infrastructure and improving the lives of our citizens rather than endless expansion. The humans exchanged glances, some form of silent communication passing between them that Trozax couldn't interpret. Agent 11 nodded slightly, then turned back to him.
Tell me about the Emperor's daily routine, he said, his tone casual but his eyes intense. When does he hold court? When does he meet with his military advisors? When is he most accessible?
The questions continued, each one more specific than the last. What route did the Emperor take from his private chambers to the throne room? How many guards accompanied him? What were their shift patterns? Did he have any regular habits, any predictable moments of vulnerability? With growing alarm, Trozax found himself answering each question. He told them about the Emperor's morning ritual of swimming in the heated pools beneath the palace, how he dismissed all but 2 guards during this time, considering it a private moment of meditation. He explained the weekly military briefings held in a secure chamber that could only be accessed through a single corridor. He detailed the Emperor's habit of walking the palace gardens in the evening, accompanied by only his most trusted guards, believing that showing fear of his own people was a sign of weakness. The Emperor has a food taster, of course, Trozax heard himself saying as if from a distance. But he insists on eating from the same prepared batch as his guards, to show that he shares their risks. It's a point of pride for him, a demonstration that he doesn't place himself above those who protect him.
Noble in its way, Agent 11 commented. What about his personal physician? How often does he require medical attention?
Dr. Kess attends him weekly, Trozax replied. The Emperor is in excellent health for his age, but he has some chronic joint pain from old battle injuries. The doctor provides injections that help with the inflammation.
Interesting, Agent 11 said thoughtfully.
You're planning to assassinate him, Trozax said. Agent 11's expression didn't change.
We are exploring all diplomatic options, he said evenly.
Trozax felt his scales shift, a ripple of discomfort running through his body. The human's idea of diplomacy seemed to be intimately connected to violence, yet he couldn't deny the logic of it. If the Emperor were removed and Prince Torvin took the throne, the invasion could be called off without loss of face. It could be framed as the new Emperor's decision, a shift in priorities rather than a retreat. I should stop talking, Trozax said, but even as he spoke, he found himself continuing. The Emperor's maids, there's a rumor that... He trailed off, horrified at himself. Why was he providing this information? He was essentially giving these humans, these invaders, a roadmap to destroying his government's leadership. Yet he couldn't seem to stop himself, perhaps because deep in his hearts he knew they were right. The invasion was doomed to fail, and if it proceeded, thousands of Brial soldiers would die for nothing. Agent 11 was taking notes now on some kind of digital device, his fingers moving across its surface.
This is very helpful, Royal Advisor. You're potentially saving thousands of lives on both sides, helping us to achieve a future of diplomacy.
Your idea of diplomacy, Trozak said slowly, seems to involve a great deal of violence. Agent 11 stood, gathering his weapons.
Sometimes, he said, a small amount of precise violence prevents a much larger catastrophe. That's a lesson humanity learned long ago, and one we've found translates well across species.
The other two humans were moving now, preparing to leave as suddenly as they'd arrived. Trozax realized with a start that they were simply going to walk out, leaving him here with the knowledge of what was coming, but no way to prevent it, or perhaps no desire to prevent it. "What happens to me?" he asked as they moved toward the door. "After whatever you're planning." Agent 11 paused at the threshold of the dining area, turning back to look at him.
That depends entirely on you, Royal Advisor. You could raise the alarm the moment we leave, tell the palace guard about our presence here. Of course, you'd have to explain how you knew so much about the Emperor's private routines, why you shared that information with enemy agents. Or,
he paused, letting the alternative hang in the air. "Or I could say nothing," Trozax finished. "Let events unfold as they will." Agent 11 smiled, and then they were gone, the door closing behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo through the suddenly empty house. Trozax stood there for a long moment, nutritional paste still drying on his ruined garments, his mind racing through everything that had just occurred. He walked slowly to his communication console, looking at the direct line to palace security. One call, one word of warning, and whatever the humans were planning could potentially be stopped. His hand hovered over the activation key. But he thought of Prince Torvin, of the desperate council session where he'd tried to convince the Emperor that attacking an unknown civilization was foolish. He thought of the thousands of soldiers on those ships flying toward what the humans claimed would be certain destruction. He thought of Agent 11's certainty, the confidence of beings who had been on Lotar for months without detection, who knew things about the Imperial Palace that even some advisors didn't know. Trozax pulled his hand back from the console and walked slowly to his bedroom to change out of his ruined garments. Whatever was coming, he realized he had already chosen his side. He had answered those questions, provided that information, because some part of him had recognized the truth in what Agent 11 had said. Sometimes, a small, precise act of violence could prevent a much larger catastrophe. As he changed clothes, Trozax found himself thinking about the human's final words. The next few days would indeed be very interesting. The Empire was about to change one way or another, and he had just played a role in determining which way that change would go. He had collaborated with enemy agents, betrayed his oath, and possibly saved his species from a devastating military defeat. He wondered if Prince Torvin would understand when he took the throne. He wondered if history would record this moment as treason or as pragmatism. He wondered if the humans were already moving through the night toward the palace, their strange technology and careful planning about to reshape the future of two civilizations. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he found himself oddly curious to see what would happen next. A whole day passed with nothing happening, and Trozax had almost died from anxiety every time his gaze met the Emperor's in the throne room. Each moment stretched like an eternity as Emperor Xerax held court, his golden eyes sweeping across his assembled advisors with the same imperious certainty they'd always held. Trozax stood in his designated place, third row from the throne, close enough to be called upon, but far enough to avoid casual scrutiny. Yet every time those eyes passed over him, Trozax felt as if the Emperor could see straight through his scales to the betrayal underneath. The Emperor spoke of the fleet's progress with evident satisfaction, his tail sweeping across the floor in broad strokes of anticipation.
"By tomorrow, they will have reached the halfway point,"
he announced to the court.
"Soon, the humans will learn what it means to stand in the path of imperial expansion."
Trozax had forced himself to nod along with the other advisors, his expression carefully neutral despite the storm in his mind. Did the humans know the fleet's exact position? Were they truly as prepared as Agent 11 had claimed? And most pressingly, when would they act? Every servant who approached the Emperor made Trozax tense. Every cup of wine offered, every document presented for signing seemed like it could be the moment. But nothing happened. That night, Trozax had barely slept, his dreams filled with visions of human agents moving through the palace like shadows, of the Emperor falling with mysterious wounds, of Prince Torvin ascending to a throne slick with his father's blood. He woke repeatedly, checking his communication console for news of palace emergencies, but there was nothing. The silence was almost worse than action would have been. It was only on the second day after the humans had broken into his home that something unusual happened. Trozax arrived at the royal palace early, as was his habit. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the palace in that typical morning light. He moved through the familiar, his footsteps echoing off the stone floors. But as he approached the throne room, he noticed something off about the palace guards' demeanor. They stood stiffer than usual, their ceremonial spears held at slightly wrong angles, their eyes darting nervously beneath their helmets.
"Halt, royal advisor,"
one of them said, stepping forward to block his passage.
"The throne room is sealed by special decree."
Trozax's hearts began to race. Had they discovered his conversation with the humans? Had someone seen the agents leaving his estate? His mind raced through possible explanations, excuses, denials. But as he looked around, he saw he wasn't alone in being barred entry. Other advisors were gathered in the antechamber, their scales displaying various shades of confusion and concern. Minister Korvac stood near a pillar, his aged frame hunched with worry. General Yist paced near the windows, her military bearing unable to conceal her agitation. And there, near the far wall, stood his friend Iviax. Iviax had always been skilled at reading the currents of court politics, his ability to gather and disseminate information legendary among the advisory council. He caught Trozax's eye and made a subtle gesture with his tail, a discreet invitation to approach. His whole posture was that of someone who was about to share rumors, the kind that could reshape empires or end careers depending on how they were handled. Trozax moved through the growing crowd of confused officials, exchanging brief nods with both enemies and friends. Minister Korvac, who had always supported the Emperor's aggressive policies, looked particularly disturbed. General Yist, who had helped plan the Earth invasion, seemed to be trying to contact someone on her private communicator, her expression growing more frustrated with each failed attempt. "Trozax, my friend," Iviax said as he approached, his voice pitched low enough that only Trozax could hear. "Such an interesting morning, wouldn't you say? The palace hasn't seen this much uncertainty in quite some time." "Indeed," Trozax replied carefully, falling into the familiar pattern of their exchanges. "One wonders what could cause such disruption to the Emperor's usually punctual court sessions." Iviax's eyes glinted with the particular gleam that meant he had information worth sharing. "One does wonder, particularly when the morning staff are speaking in whispers about unusual discoveries in the Emperor's private chambers." Trozax kept his expression neutral, though his tail wanted to tense with anxiety. "Discoveries? The most concerning kind." Iviax leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low tone. "They say the Emperor went for his morning swim as usual, accompanied by Prince Varix. A father-son moment, perhaps, to discuss the succession or the ongoing invasion. But when the servants arrived to prepare their post-swim refreshments..." He paused, clearly savoring the weight of what he was about to share. Trozax wanted to shake him, to demand he speak faster, but that would have been wildly out of character. Instead, he waited with practiced patience. "Both were found in the pools," Iviax continued. "The Emperor and his eldest son, floating face down in the heated waters. The guards say it looked like they had fought, scratches on both bodies, the Emperor's throat bearing what appeared to be claw marks, Prince Varix with bruising around his neck, as if they had killed each other in some violent disagreement." Trozax struggled to keep his emotions inside, his scales threatening to flare with the shock of it. This wasn't what he had expected at all. Not just the Emperor, but Prince Varix as well. The humans had been even more thorough than he'd imagined, and the staging, making it look like a fight between father and son, was brilliant. No poison to trace, no mysterious assassins to hunt, just a family disagreement that had gone catastrophically wrong. "Surely that's impossible," Trozax managed to say, his voice remarkably steady. "The Emperor and Prince Varix, despite their similarities and temperament, were united in their vision for the Empire." "Were they?" Iviax asked, his tone suggesting he knew more. "There are whispers that Prince Varix had a different vision of the invasion, that he wanted different things than his father in case of success. Perhaps he tried to convince his father to enslave those humans instead of killing them, and when the Emperor refused..." Trozax realized what the humans had done. They'd created a narrative that would explain everything while raising no suspicions of outside interference. A heated argument about the invasion, tempers flaring, the legendary Xirax rage manifesting in both father and son, and a tragic mutual destruction. It was almost poetic. "And Prince Torvin?" Trozax asked, though he already knew the answer. "Will be Emperor before the sun reaches its zenith," Iviax confirmed. "The succession is clear, and the Council is already preparing for the coronation ceremony. They say his first act will be to recall the fleet, out of respect for his father's death, of course, and to ensure stability during the transition." Trozax felt a wave of awe wash over him. The humans had orchestrated it perfectly. No evidence of their involvement, no reason for retaliation, just a tragic accident that happened to solve everyone's problems. He thought of Agent 11's words about precision violence preventing larger catastrophes, and understood now exactly what he'd meant. 3 months later, the throne room had changed subtly under Emperor Torvin's rule. The harsh lighting that Emperor Xirax had preferred had been softened, creating a warmer atmosphere. The military banners that had dominated the walls were now interspersed with tapestries depicting scenes of cultural achievement. The throne itself remained the same, carved from a single massive crystal that had been in the royal family for 1,000 years. But somehow, Torvin made it seem less like a seat of conquest and more like a position of responsibility. Trozax stood in what was now his customary position, first among the advisory council, closest to the throne. The promotion had come swiftly after Torvin's ascension, recognition for his wisdom in counseling against rash military actions. The young emperor valued his advice, sought his opinion on matters both large and small, and trusted him with a completeness that made Trozax's guilt burn like acid in his stomachs. "Trade agreements with the Yorax Confederation are proceeding well," Trozax reported, reading from his daily briefing. "The resources we're receiving in exchange for our medical technology will more than compensate for any minerals we might have gained from other ventures." Torvin nodded thoughtfully. The Emperor was young, barely 30 cycles, but he carried himself with a maturity that his father had never possessed despite being twice his age.
"Other ventures like the Earth invasion," he said quietly. "We need not dance around it, old friend. My father's final mistake, the one that cost him and my brother their lives."
The official story had solidified over the months, a violent disagreement about the invasion that had awakened old resentments and ended in tragedy. No one questioned it anymore. The fleet had returned home to find a new emperor and new priorities. The military had been restructured to focus on defense rather than expansion. The Empire had entered what historians were already calling the Great Stabilization. "Your Majesty," Trozax began carefully, "there's a matter I've been meaning to discuss with you. About Earth." Torvin's green eyes, so much calmer than his father's had ever been, turned to him with interest.
"Oh?"
"We know very little about them, truly. Our intelligence was clearly flawed. They were catalogued as pre-interstellar, yet there are reports, unconfirmed but persistent, of unknown vessels spotted near our border worlds, ships that appear and disappear without a trace, using technology our scientists can't explain." It was as close as Trozax could come to telling the truth. He couldn't reveal what he knew about humans already being among them, possibly still watching, still gathering intelligence with their terrifying methods. But he could plant seeds, prepare the ground for what he believed needed to happen.
You think they're more advanced than we believed,
Torvin said. I think, Trozak said slowly, that any civilization capable of creating the kind of fear in your father and brother that led to their fatal disagreement must be formidable indeed. Perhaps it would be wise to extend a formal diplomatic invitation, open communications, establish peaceful relations before any misunderstandings occur. Torvin was quiet for a long moment, his tail moving in the slow pattern that indicated deep thought.
You know something,
he said finally.
Something you're not telling me.
Trozax met his Emperor's gaze steadily. I know that war with Earth would be catastrophic for the Empire. I know that your father's death, tragic as it was, may have saved thousands of lives. And I know that you, your Majesty, have the wisdom to see that strength isn't always measured in conquered worlds.
Sometimes I wonder,
Torvin said softly,
if my father's death was truly the accident it appeared to be. The timing was remarkably convenient. The way he and Varix died, so perfectly eliminating the two voices most strongly supporting the invasion.
Trozak said nothing. He couldn't. The weight of his secret, of his compliance with the humans' plan, sat heavy on his shoulders. He wondered if Agent 11 was somewhere on Lotar even now, perhaps watching this very conversation through some undetectable surveillance device. He wondered how many other worlds harbored hidden human observers, gathering intelligence, waiting to act with that same terrible speed if threatened.
But perhaps, Torvin continued, I'm just overthinking.
He straightened in his throne, his voice taking on the formal tone of imperial decree.
Royal Advisor Trozax, you will prepare a formal diplomatic communique to Earth. We will express our desire for peaceful relations. They don't need to know that we were planning to invade them.
It will be done, Your Majesty, Trozax said, bowing low. As he left the throne room to begin drafting the message, Trozax thought about the future they were building, a future where the Empire coexisted with humanity, where trade replaced conquest, where the terrifying ways of human diplomacy would never need to be demonstrated again. Because war with them, war with a species that could infiltrate your homeworld, live among you undetected, and eliminate your leadership while making it look like an accident, was a future Trozax couldn't dare to think of. The Empire had been saved from that fate by the violent death of an emperor and his heir, a tragedy that was actually a mercy. As he walked through the palace corridors, Trozax wondered if he would ever meet Agent 11 again. If one day the human would appear in his home once more, not with weapons and threats, but perhaps with gratitude for helping prevent a war. Or perhaps the humans preferred to remain shadows, unknown and unknowable, watching from the darkness with their stealth technology and their pragmatic approach to peace. Either way, Trozax would ensure the Empire never gave them reason to act again. The message to Earth would be perfect, expressing exactly the right tone of respect and desire for friendship, because he had learned a valuable lesson. Humanity's friendship was infinitely preferable to their enmity. The Empire would have peace with Earth. Trozax would make certain of it, even if that peace had been built on lies and the bones of an emperor who had dreamed of conquest.